Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast. Darren Mitchell here, and another very special guest. This time, all the way from north of the border. He is an Australian. He is a man that's had 11 to 12 years of sales experience, both as an individual contributor and also a leader. And we'll get into his story really shortly. But welcome to the podcast, Mr. Kieran Krohn. How are you, my friend?
Very well, thank you, Darren. It's great to be with you, and I'm excited for the conversation today.
Now, Kieran, you are, ex-HubSpot, but also currently the head of growth at ScaleStation, which is a RevOps and growth marketing agency, and also the recent podcast host of, I think you're into the first half a dozen podcast episodes, so the Growth Unlocked podcast. And we were just talking before we press record about your experiences with podcasting so far. So for the listeners, what's the biggest lesson from podcasting in the few episodes you've done so far?
Well, I tell you what, for starters, it's kind of nice to be on the other side of the fence, doing more of the talking. Hopefully, not too much talking today, but no, it's been a really enjoyable experience. I think the biggest learning for me is it's probably a lot more work than I was expecting, and that's a reflection of the fact that most of the things in life that are worth doing are worth putting the effort and the energy in for, right? But I really enjoyed the process of just having conversations with people, getting to speak to some really high caliber operators and people that I probably wouldn't normally get to spend time with, which is pretty amazing.
It is, and the more you do this, and what I found this year, because I was just saying before that yesterday I recorded my second individual podcast for the year. Everything else has been an interview process. It's amazing how many people you get to talk with from around the world who, as you rightly say, you'd never actually get to probably meet many of them unless you're at some sort of international conference. But what's interesting, and we'll get into what you do today in a second, it just validates for me the fact that sales and sales leadership, irrespective of where you happen to be in the world, there are some common themes and some common principles that are age old and irrespective of borders and boundaries, which is fabulous.
Totally.
Yeah. So as the head of growth at ScaleStation, but also podcast host and previous man about town around HubSpot, I want to talk about all things sales and sales leadership today from a perspective of what you're seeing in the marketplace. And I know before we press record, we talked about the highs and lows of sales leadership. I guess as a precursor, as a platform for this conversation, if you can just give us a bit of a rundown on your background in terms of what you've done from a sales and sales leadership perspective, and specifically what led you to be in the role that you are now with ScaleStation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in sales for, let's say 11, probably going on 12 years now. Might I add that never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that I'd be in sales. It wasn't anything that I had envisaged or dreamt about at any point in my life. But like I'm sure a lot of salespeople, kind of fell into it at the point in time. I won't go too much into the details, but I guess the evolution of that over sort of, let's call it 12 years as an individual contributor, working in media sales, and then moving into the tech side of things, software, obviously HubSpot being like a key part of my career for about 8 years. I was thrown into the partner side of the business, actually not even expecting that. I thought I was applying for a direct sales role and got the call from the recruiter, congratulations, you're in. By the way, you're going to be in the channel. And I was like, what's the channel? So I had to kind of figure that out for starters. In hindsight, was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm very lucky that I got put into the partner space and I learned so much, getting to do a lot of consulting, sales training, sales enablement, go-to-market strategy with the partners that I was working with. Massively helped to build my business acumen. And I did that for about 5.5 years. And I did relatively well, won a bunch of awards. I think you can see a couple of bats there in the corner, which is signed by some of the execs from HubSpot. So that was awesome. And then after that point in time, I've kind of found that I wanted to I guess, increase my impact and also stretch myself, take on a bunch of new responsibilities and do something that I hadn't really done before, which was leadership. I never really
Yeah.
imagined myself being a sales leader. The more I thought about it and reflected on the skills and sort of activities that I was doing when I was a channel partner manager, a lot of it was focused on sales coaching,
Yeah.
right? And so I think I had the benefit of taking a lot of that experience across to the direct side of the business.
Mhm.
And I think that made the transition a little bit easier for me. Not going to say it was easy by any stretch of the imagination. I think, anyone that takes on a sales leadership role is a very brave individual. And as as we know, there's plenty of ups
Yeah.
and downs and highs and lows. But yeah, I did that for 2 years, and I think one of the real motivations behind that was actually getting to be able to, pay it forward and help people in their earlier stages of their career. So, sales reps that are relatively new to sales, been in the funnel for a couple of years, and really like focus on helping them develop their skills, not just professionally, but personally, because there's a lot of these interchangeable skills that sales
Yeah.
has outside of work.
Yeah.
And that was awesome. So, a bunch of the reps that I was working with hit P Club. They achieved, heaps, a few of their own personal goals, which was awesome to see that happen. And then, yeah, after 2 years, I decided that I wanted a new challenge. And I did that for about 3 or 4 months. And then, yeah, just more recently, I've moved over to the partner side of the business. So now working more so on execution and actually like delivering results for customers.
Love it. Love it. So if you look back on your sales leadership career, because you mentioned a few things there, helping some of the sales guys achieve some pretty big numbers and personal outcomes. What did you take away from that? What was your key lesson there as a sales leader? And the reason I ask that is there are a lot of sales leaders out there that love the hunt. They love to do the sale themselves, and they sometimes get in the way of the sales rep. What did you learn
Oh,
through
yeah,
that process?
absolutely. There's probably a few things that come to mind. First would be the importance of, as you said, not taking the driver's seat too much, and that was really hard in the beginning because there's this temptation and this tendency to just think, okay, like I can do this myself. It's just easier if I take over this call. And in the beginning, I think there's definitely merit in doing that by leading by example, showing them
Mm,
what best practice looks like.
yeah.
But one thing that I did have to adjust to over time was how I would smooth that out in terms of showing them in the beginning by leading, kind of taking the reins a bit and then gradually over time stepping back and allowing them to take control.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I did take time, like over a year, to kind of figure that out. And I had a coach to help me through that as well. And then I guess the other part to it was I realized that, most businesses have set KPIs that come down from leadership management in terms of what's expected of reps. And I think it's important to set expectations 100%, not
Mm,
even when they start the job, but before they start the job so they know what they're getting themselves into.
yeah.
But then beyond that, instead of giving people metrics and numbers that are company focused, flipping that on its head to let's actually engineer your daily activity metrics to something that's meaningful for you.
Mm,
Right. And so I'd go through an exercise of this kind of had a spreadsheet called the income planning workbook where we essentially punch in all their numbers around, the metrics that are important across the funnel. And then we would engineer that based off their income goal for that year. So we'd look at kickers, accelerators, and the bonuses they could make, and then tie that specific number to something that was meaningful for them, which
yeah.
for some people could have been buying a house, it could have been
Mhm.
going on a great holiday, Europe, whatever that might be. And then they had metrics that were tied to something that was important to them, which was more motivating and probably taking a bit more of the carrot approach as opposed to the stick.
What's fascinating about what you just said is even today, there are a lot of organizations that think the old sales, like the President's Club or salesperson of the month, salesperson of the quarter, salesperson of the year is what's going to motivate people. And they throw cash at people. But what you were talking about is really getting to understand individuals as an individual and trying to figure out what intrinsically moves them to do what it is they do and what is it to them they want to achieve, and then building metrics and behaviors around that. You can still have your targets because you still got to hit those, but understanding what motivates people is a key thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I think the feedback I got from the reps I was working with was how much they appreciated that. That was some of the kind of testimonials and reviews that I got when I sort of left that leadership role. That was one thing that
Yeah,
stood out in
yeah,
most of those reviews is sort of how much they appreciated the investment in their personal success.
yeah. Love it. And as sales leaders, sometimes we can lose sight of that because depending on, I guess, the organization and the kind of pressure you're under as a sales leader, you can almost continue to drink the Kool-Aid of the organization and think that because we're part of this organization, then everybody's on board with the strategy and the process and all that sort of stuff without individualizing it. If you look back on your sales leadership career, what would you, because I want to talk about sales enablement and what you do today in a second, but what would you consider to be your biggest, I guess, not so much failure, but lesson? What did you learn through that process that perhaps has held you in really good stead for what you're now doing? Because the consulting you do with founders and small businesses and medium enterprises today, in terms of go to market, what's one of the key lessons you've been able to learn from your sales leadership career that you can take forward?
I think one of the key areas that has been very transferable is the importance of coaching and the enablement piece, and also learning and understanding the differences and the different styles of coaching. There's training and there's coaching,
Yeah,
and kind of understanding and recognizing where people are at within their kind of journey and their learning curve. And yeah, I got taught this interesting framework called situational leadership when I was at HubSpot. And I think it's a brilliant framework because it helps you to diagnose and recognize where that individual is within those different quadrants or those different stages within their kind of learning journey.
mm,
And then by understanding that, it allows you to adapt your training or your coaching style. Some people need to be given the answers at some points. They don't always
yeah,
have the answers.
yeah,
And it can be frustrating for them if you're trying to coach them when they just don't know what's going on. So I sort of learned the hard way, right? By seeing people that were frustrated. And I remember that myself when I was an individual contributor as well. And I think that's a big thing for me is that enablement piece is everything. And, obviously at HubSpot, like we were a tech company, so we had access to all the tech,
mm,
including our own. And the technology is great. It can do some amazing things, but unless you have the underpinning fundamentals of what it means to be a salesperson in terms of deeply understanding the personas, the customers that you're selling to, what their problems are, and building messaging around that. The
yeah,
technology is, it's neither here nor there. So the coaching and then the fundamentals of like what it means to be a good quality salesperson. Those are probably the things that stand out for me that I've tried to sort of transfer over across onto the side that I'm on now with ScaleStation.
brilliant, brilliant. As you were talking, I had these thoughts pop into my head. I used to work at a company that sounds very similar to Telstra, that because it was Telstra. And I remember that back in the day, I think it would have been 2010, 2011, we had in the enterprise and government space, we had the year of the coach. And it's very pertinent because you're talking about the importance of enablement and coaching and having it customized. It's amazing how many sales leaders across the enterprise and government business didn't have a grasp on what coaching actually was. And so they were treating everybody exactly the same. And there was one person in particular that considered himself to be a fantastic coach. And when you watched him do what he did, he basically just gave instructions. There was no questions. You just do this, follow the bouncing ball, and all will be good. And at the end of the year, when his team wasn't getting the results that everybody expected, his turnaround comment was, "Well, thank Christ, the year of the coach is over. Now I can get back to doing what I normally do." It was fascinating. So coaching is incredibly important as a sales leader, and it's something that we can't overestimate. Um, from your perspective, then moving forward in terms of the role that you have now, and we want to talk about like enablement and sales enablement. Before we press record, we were talking about how some organizations might have a really um, good sales strategy, sales methodology, and CRM systems, but a lot of organizations don't have, I guess, the deep pockets to bring in all the technology and all the processes. What are some of the key challenges that you're finding out there in the marketplace in the areas that you're working in around this thing called sales enablement? And by that I mean, what sort of challenges are they grasping with that you can help them with to really improve their ability to penetrate their market?
Yeah, the point that you touched on before is extremely pertinent to this in the sense that, I was lucky enough to work at a large enterprise that had, good amount of cash flow. It was very established in the sense that we had a revenue operations function, we had a sales enablement function, we had a learning and development team, and that's just not the resource and reality that sort of small to medium-sized companies have access to. There might be bits and pieces of that, but it's the underlying philosophy of revenue operations and sales enablement and making sure that, these companies that don't have those functions have access to uh, strategy, expertise, and, resource that can potentially plug that gap. So, we can plug that gap for businesses, or we can work more on the enablement piece, which is, teach the teacher, so to speak. So helping them to build that function internally. And it's not our goal to, keep them on a lifeline for years and years. We really want to take them on that transformation journey and help them to take those steps themselves. And so that's a big piece in terms of thinking about the bigger picture and sort of what's the resource, what are the steps that we need to take over the next 6, 12, 24 months to get you in a position where you have that resource. So yeah, it's even the fundamentals of it, like you would think that most companies have a sales methodology in place. That's not the reality though. I'd say 90% of businesses that I speak with, they're pretty loose. I mean, they're just having conversations with customers. There's no framework, there's no real structure, there's no consistency, which creates a few issues. So firstly, it makes it hard to coach around because,
Mm,
everyone's doing things in a different way. And that's the reality is there's always going to be nuances because we're all humans. But I think if there's a structure in place that can be used to benchmark and reference people against, it makes it easier to coach and uplift in those different
mm,
areas. And then I think the other piece is how do we make it repeatable and scalable so you can bring on more salespeople in the future, have them ramp as fast as possible, because that time to ramp is so crucial. Like you want to make sure that your salespeople are getting wins and are very successful in that first sort of 6 month period, which is 6 to even 10 months, 12 months is sort of the typical ramps that we see.
yeah.
So really making sure that as these new people are coming on board, they know what they need to achieve at what stage. So kind of mapping out that pathway over the 6 to 12 month ramp period.
Yeah. And it was interesting you say a large percentage, I think you said it might have been 90% don't have some form of sales methodology, although they probably think they do. Do you think that comes from, because I know you work with a lot of founders and a lot of startups and so forth. Do you think that comes from the fact that the startups or the founders have been so good at, I guess, creating a solution or creating a product, and they've been the ones to start selling it? So they think, well, it makes sense to me, but as you start to scale your business, it's really difficult to duplicate yourself because you've got all the IP in your head. So you've got to wrap some sort of sales process that breeds consistency. Is that what you're seeing? Because I hear a lot of founders talk about the fact that we've got a fantastic product, we've got a fantastic solution, it solves this problem, and they're saying all the right things, but it's not necessarily scalable because as soon as they bring other people in who don't have the background that the founder does, they're like, well, what's this product? There's no emotional connection to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is very true for the earlier stage businesses that, I mean, most of them all start being founder led, right? Someone that is potentially a technical operator, has a great idea, they start to get product market fit, they gain traction. And yeah, a lot of that stuff does sit up there. And that is probably just one of the most common problems that we come across is businesses are just so focused on, acquiring customers, generating revenue and trying to become profitable that in
Mm,
that process, they overlook the importance of documenting things. And so, documenting not just what does the sales process or the sales methodology look like, but what are all the touch points that a customer is going to go through to purchase and then
yeah,
onboard and activate and retain as well. So process mapping so they can visualize everything is really helpful and kind of shines a light on where there might be some opportunities to optimize their processes that are
yeah,
suboptimal. So
yeah.
that's always a really big kind of aha moment, and businesses get a lot of value from that. But yeah, just getting back to your point before, it is really getting the IP out of the head, documenting it, having some consistency, having a framework. I mean, even having playbooks that are baked into your
Yeah.
CRM is such a simple way of doing that. Once you define, choose the methodology, there's tons of them out there, but having that consistent, it's not just about having the methodology, but having it live inside the CRM. And that's where the beauty of this and the brilliance and the magic comes when you fuse these two things together by having the strategy and the methodology blended with the technology, and having that live inside the environment where salespeople are spending all their time,
Yeah.
which should be the CRM, I'd hope.
Should be.
Should be, not always, but that's where this stuff needs to live, right? So always want to try avoid situations where stuff is sitting outside of the CRM. That's where integration is really important, and
Yeah.
giving salespeople what they need there, where they're at the coalface of the business, is really important.
I was just laughing as you were talking about that because I remember back in the days that, and even some of the sales leaders I speak to today, one of the biggest challenges is CRM adoption with their sales team. They say, "Oh, I've got this fantastic methodology I'm working with. I've got this fantastic bunch of prospects that I'm working through. They're all on a spreadsheet. I don't want to share that with anybody else because it's mine." So how do we get adoption? Because when we talk about sales enablement, what we're essentially talking about, and you said it before, marrying the sales methodology and all the playbooks with the CRM system. So essentially, there's one source of truth. So no matter who's looking at, I guess, the information, they get the same message. And that points down to culture, is my view, in terms of how do we get people to be authentic and put in the CRM system legitimate information that is used to run campaigns, to do outreach, whatever the case might be. What's your experience? What's your thought process on this thing called adoption of things like sales enablement? When I talk about that, it's the CRM system. Is it? Are you finding it's easier today than ever because it's more well known, or is there still some challenges with some organizations having individual contributors for whatever reason wanting to take a little bit of a back step and not be fully, I want to say, truthful in terms of what's in there?
I mean, adoption is the biggest issue, I would say, even with more mature companies that have been on a CRM for many years. So it's there's a few systemic issues behind that. I mean, sometimes it is the technology. It can be a burden. They can be systems can be cumbersome and they can slow salespeople down and actually create more work
Yeah,
than they should be needing to do. So yeah, I can imagine if you're a salesperson and you're needing to spend another half an hour to an hour a day doing admin and things that it's going to take you away from selling and your revenue generating activities. That's going to be frustrating and naturally going to lead to them going back to their old ways and using spreadsheets and whatever they were doing before. So that's one piece. I think your point before around the cultural side of things is important. And one thing that I find is really key in this is if you're going to take a business on a journey, which all this stuff is, it's a digital transformation and a business process journey, is getting people on board. So,
yeah,
firstly, I mean, there's the sort of top-down approach and there's the bottom-up approach, right? And so I think firstly, making sure that the executive team are aligned in terms of does this align with the strategy and what's important to us as a business?
yeah,
And then the other piece is if you're going to be taking your people along on that journey, e.g., let's talk about your sales team here, get them involved early, right? Throughout that assessment and that evaluation process, because
mm,
you want to make sure that your sales team are looking at the future state in terms of how much better it can be. And a CRM shouldn't just be an administrative tool, shouldn't just be there for Big Brother to watch out and do forecasting and reporting and see how much activity is going on. But it really should be a productivity tool. It should enable salespeople to be more effective and get more done and close more revenue. So I think that's key in terms of going through that process, getting people on board, and really focusing in on, okay, what are the issues that we have at the moment? Let's pinpoint, say, two or three of those, and then as you're going through the evaluation process with a vendor or working with a partner that can help you through that, be very specific about how we're going to address these issues and
mm.
how quickly are we going to see value, because time to value is really important. And so sometimes there are some really quick wins that you can execute on within the first couple of weeks and months to prove that.
Yeah. Because the other thing to think about as well is the CRM as a sales enablement tool is not just a prospecting tool. It's also, and I think you put a post on LinkedIn not long ago where you're talking about what happens after the sale is made and a lot of the information that has to be captured. And particularly if you've got multiple people that perhaps there might be a salesperson or like a hunter that actually creates the new logo, and then they hand it over to somebody else within the organization to manage the relationship moving forward. I often say to salespeople that the sale really doesn't start until after the first sale is made, and some would say after the second sale because it's now more of a long-term relationship. How important there? It's probably a loaded question. How important, therefore, is the CRM system as an ecosystem in an organization that underpins, I guess, the growth and profitability of that business?
It's vital. I think really the thing there is having all of your teams and different departments working out of the same system. The big challenge is when they're working in silos. So
Yeah.
marketing working over here, sales here, customer service over here. You might have a CRM, you might have a project management tool, you might have a bunch of other MarTech over there. So having everything under one roof and then having all people working in one system with a single customer record is a really good starting point.
Mm.
And then I think to your point before around that, the sale only really starts when the contract is signed. That's everything. If you put yourself in the customer's shoes, they're looking for validation around have I actually purchased the right product or service, and they're looking for proof around that within the first 90 days. So
Mm.
making that handover process as seamless as possible, even simple things like do you have a framework or a playbook that your salespeople are filling out, say like towards the end of the sales process, if they're good, they would have done a pretty thorough discovery process, and
Yeah.
they should be able to document all of the key outcomes that that customer is looking to achieve.
Yeah.
Having that standardized so they can fill that out, tag it or pin it to the top of the deal or the company record, and then essentially just mentioning that to the onboarding specialist or the project manager that's going to take over that customer, having a quick sync over Slack or however your communication channel might be. But the more that you can standardize that and make it mandatory as well, like that's the great thing about a CRM is you can set mandatory fields and properties to say we need this information filled out before you can essentially execute on this into the
Mm.
CRM, and then that kind of allows you to standardize some of those things and make sure you're capturing the right information.
I love the term mandatory. You could almost make it mandatory. You got to complete the CRM system before you get your commission check. That'd drive compliance, wouldn't it?
Well, they don't have a choice. Yeah, exactly. You want to get paid.
So with that, what in the work that you're doing at ScaleStation, how would you describe? Because there'll be people listening to this who are in big organizations, small organizations, and startups, thinking, okay, that's all well and good. I've got this sales enablement thing. I think we've got the right product. We've got what seems to be a methodology that seems to be working. Um, what would you say to those organizations out there in terms of are there any key elements that are just absolute must-haves? Because sometimes people be looking at this and saying, "Oh, geez, I've got to invest in all of this technology, and I don't know that I've got the budget. But how do I just pick the eyes out of this? And what are the key things that you would say are non-negotiable that would enable us to get the information that we need to create I guess for want of a better term, the momentum that we want in an organization, rather than saying the whole thing? Are there key bits of what we need from a sales enablement perspective that we just can't overlook?
Mm, that's a good question. I think there's a few pieces to it. It's making sure that your whatever methodology you have is baked into the CRM for a starting point. That stuff I was speaking about before in terms of do you have playbooks at different parts of the sales process? Do you have mandatory fields? Are you capturing the right information? Those are kind of table stakes, I would think.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I think then really like there's a bunch of different ways you can cut it up. But the main thing really is, yeah, it goes back to what you're talking about before in terms of the adoption piece is firstly helping the people, the operators and the users that are going to be using the technology to understand the reason why. and the benefits that it has for them and for the customer as well. And then taking them on that journey step by step. It's not going to happen overnight. I think that's really, really important, is always explaining the why behind what you're doing. And the other thing is make sure that the tools themselves are connected, right? They are integrated. The amount of times I speak to, business leaders where they're complaining about the fact that, emails are sitting in Outlook, they're not getting logged into the CRM, they don't have a track of their customer history, they don't have that timeline, just really simple stuff like that. These little things that you think would be so basic, making sure that you've got native integrations between your key systems, email, CRM, accounting, like those are just some basic examples, but making sure that there's connections between them ensures that you've got data being captured and
Yeah.
things are not being missed.
And so as a sales leader or as a business leader, that's an absolute Monty, because if you've got customers sending through, if you're a sales rep and I'm the sales leader and you're getting emails from your from your customer that I can't get any visibility of, and there might be some personal stuff, how's the weather, how's the footy team going, etc. But other parts of the business that need to know information in order to provide a service, it's fundamental that they are across that. And it's just that native integration is absolutely pivotal. So it's a really good point. So moving forward in the work that you're doing at ScaleStation, what are some of the, I guess, the key industry trends, if you like, that you're seeing in 2024 and beyond? Because we hear a lot about things like AI and how AI is going to, take over the world and replace a lot of SDRs and business account managers and stuff like that. What are some of the things that in the work that you're doing, you're coming up against in the marketplace that we as sales leaders need to be aware of as we move into the back end of 24 and into 25?
Yeah, AI is part of that. I think it's been quite fascinating how my observation, at least, around what's potentially a very game-changing technology really hasn't had the adoption that I was expecting.
Okay.
Most companies, they might dabble in it, but they don't have a strategy behind it in terms
Yeah.
of how they're going to use AI. And I can understand why. I mean, it is pretty overwhelming. There's dozens of new AI tools that pop up every day. And again, I think getting back to that enablement piece that we spoke about before, I personally think that if you're going to have an enablement function, if you do have the resource, having a dedicated person that basically champions and owns the AI part of that department could be interesting. But I think, as you have developed the strategy and just thinking about the use cases for it, there's a bunch of applications, and I think that people need to be trained, and that's part of the onboarding process. I think like part of the wider the wider observational trends that I'm seeing is just the connectedness in terms of businesses have so many different tools.
Yeah.
A mid-market company might have between 15 to 25 different pieces of software,
Yeah.
and often there is overlap in terms of what they do. There's almost always these issues of lack of connectivity. So data is being siloed and stored in different places, and that makes it really hard for business leaders to make decisions or strategic decisions that are backed off data. So I think having clean data is just table stakes, but it's not common. Like most companies come to us because they've got issues with data, and we go through a process of helping them to build a data structure and get that hygiene in place. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that is really key, is connectedness, data hygiene, so you can make the right decisions. Because the last thing that you want to be doing is, making bets on things that are informed by the wrong kind of insights.
Yeah. And sometimes those insights are, which way is the wind blowing? Let me get my crystal ball out and see what's going to happen the next 6 months.
Yeah, for sure.
Has
I'll
to be some
probably add on
stuff.
to that one piece as well. Sorry, is around we're in this time at the moment where, capital is more expensive, interest rates are as high as they've been for a long time. And so the growth at all costs is just not a thing anymore. And businesses are really looking to maximize their efficiency, their operating efficiency. And
Yeah.
I think this is where there's a really big opportunity to use the technology in the right ways to, again, understand where are all the manual things that are happening at the moment. can we potentially automate those? There's some things that probably shouldn't be automated, but there's always opportunities to tighten up and leverage technology to basically give more time back to your people so they can focus on having quality conversations with customers.
It's a good point you make, and it sort of raises a question. And I know a lot of people I talk to keep asking this, and I'm going to ask it directly. Just the definition around revenue operations, is that kind of what you're alluding to? Like the definition of revenue operations, it's all the things that go into creating opportunities and revenue generation for the organization, but putting some sort of framework or ring fence around it that can drive those efficiencies.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, really, it's around how do you help your people to be more effective? What processes can be used to be optimized and drive those efficiencies? What are the systems and the technology that underpin and drive those and reinforce those processes? And then the other piece is the enablement part, right? So making sure that you're continuing to coach and develop your people so they become better at what they do. And at the end of the day, just driving more success for the individual drives better outcomes for the business and for the customer as well.
Which means that we need to be on the same page, because there might be some people within the organization who wear a different hat, who may believe that setting up a CRM system and all the software around that is the enabler, whereas others might think, no, we've got to put the right tools in the hands of the people, and that could be how do we help them have better, high quality conversations with their customers? Because if we can't get that, then no amount of fantastic technology is going to be worth anything, because the conversations are crap.
Totally. Yeah, exactly
So
right.
if you're looking at if there are people here listening now who are not so much in the early stage of their business, but maybe at a crossroads, given that there's a lot of things happening in the marketplace. As you mentioned before, capital is a lot more expensive, interest rates are higher. People have to be either both individually, but also from a company perspective, really looking at their bottom line and looking at how we can do more with less. And it's not so much cutting back on stuff, but if there were some areas, and you might have already mentioned some of these, but that were top of mind that you are using today in the calls and the conversations you're having with the market, that can help them get either back on the track or start to move forward in relation to whether it be enablement, coaching, whatever the case might be. Are there two or three key things that they can focus on that can give them the opportunity of moving the needle?
Yeah, the one that stands out to me is again, getting back to the data piece in terms of, that's one of the things I love about revenue operations is looking at those key touch points of the whole customer lifecycle from acquisition through to retention, measuring those conversion rates to be able to understand where some of those opportunities lie. And it doesn't even need to be dramatic improvements. If you can increase, let's say if you've got six different touch points or conversions across that full customer lifecycle, just by increasing 1 or 2% on a number of those different stages has a big compounding effect over time. So starting by creating visibility in terms of benchmarking what are those different conversion rates throughout that entire customer lifecycle, and making sure you're not just focusing on the acquisition phase, which is actually where a lot of businesses they're obsessed. It's like, how do we generate more leads? How do we get more customers? And the onboarding, the activation, the retention, the referrals, the upsell, the expansion, that is often forgotten about.
Yeah.
And really, like in today's age where, that's those issues we spoke about before about capital and scarcity, retention and expansion should be the key focus, right? Yeah, of course, we all want to acquire new logos, but expansion and making sure that we are delivering those outcomes for customers should be a core focus.
Which is logical, because if people have done their research, they'll know that it costs a lot more to actually acquire a new logo than it does to try and retain a new logo. And this is why I keep saying your sale doesn't start until after the sale is made, because the customer will get a true indication of what you think about them based on how much attention you're going to continue to give them after the sale has been made, where there's nothing necessarily in it for you. So it's a great point. So I know you've got a hard finish pretty shortly. So if people want to know a little bit more about you and connect with you, but specifically about ScaleStation, where's the where's the best place for them to get access to you, to connect with you, and to learn more about what you guys do?
Pretty active on LinkedIn. So if you want to look me up there, Kieran Krohn. Also have my podcast as well, as you mentioned at the start, the Growth Unlocked podcast. Little plug there. They'd probably be the main areas. We also have a website, ScaleStation.io. If you want to check that out, we've got a bunch of free resources. A website grader if you want to check out how your website is performing. And yeah, we're posting pretty regularly through the blog, and yeah, or pretty active, like posting about 4 or 5 times a week on LinkedIn and sharing my insights around what I'm learning about, and then some of the conversations I'm having with some great go-to-market leaders.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely. So, mate, this has been a great conversation. Greatly appreciate you sharing some thoughts. Put my teeth back in on sales enablement. I'll put those links in the show notes, and actively encourage people to check Kieran out, to go to ScaleStation.io, but also to check out his podcast, because he's going to be a behemoth in the podcasting industry. He's only a few episodes in, but he's talking to some great go-to-market leaders. So, Kieran, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast, and all the best in your future endeavors, my friend.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot, Darren.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com, and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.